There are enormous public lies here, just as there are in Iraq. The body count in Chicago is much smaller, but the lies don't begin in 2007 with the planning of the closing of schools from Edison to Orr to Harper High School all the way out to Carver Middle School. The lies begin the day Arne Duncan becomes CEO of the CPS and inherits the lies that Paul Vallis was doing on behalf of Mayor Daley from 1995 when Daley was made dictator of the Chicago Public Schools. The latest rumors as of early March of 2008 are that Gladstone is officially being closed for underutilization, so that it can be even more underutilized when Arne Duncan and Mayor Daley give it to some private entity as a charter school. A charter school like the ones that are currently inside Austin High School can operate at 10% of the capacity of the building to educate children and still get away with continuing operations. Gladstone is just another in a long line of examples of the great giveaway of public school buildings to charter school operators and other privatizers. So it's probably not only Gladstone that's not only being screwed now by being closed, but it's going to be flipped into privatized hands in the form of a charter school. Gladstone's just the one where the verifiable rumors seem to be coming first and foremost, but it won't be the last.
Why would you go and close down a good school that's performing? That's what you want, isn't it, CPS? Citizens of Chicago, you need to wake up and realize our community is under siege by some elitist bankers, business people who do not care about the education of our children.
Why did they feel so bold to close 19 schools? Why did they feel so bold that they could do this in the face of community protest?
Well, probably the biggest reason that Duncan knew he had a green light to close as many schools as possible, as ruthlessly as possible, and amidst as many lies as possible, was that Marilyn Stewart had given him that green light in August 2007 by negotiating and ramming through a union contract that basically sold out the union's members on every key point that she had beaten the drum about during her previous 3-year term. The specifics are fairly vast, but in this particular case, the union could have negotiated a very strong section on school closings, reorganizations, reconstitutions, and any of the other re's that the Daley administration has been implementing through the Board of Education since Marilyn Stewart took over the union in 2004. Instead, she left that part of the contract completely open and basically left open the door for the Duncan administration to drive a steamroller over the union's members in as many schools as they want to. There was nothing in that contract to prevent the board from doing this or to even require that the board sit down with the unions and have a reasonable negotiation about it. There's some really wishy-washy wording in the contract that allows for some discussion, but nothing that would hit the board where it hurts. Probably the biggest thing that Marilyn Stewart did for the Daley administration was going in an ignorant way, negotiating a really stupid contract, ramming it through the House of Delegates on August 31st, 2007, without even taking the no votes, and then ramming through a rather corrupt referendum in the schools on September 10th, 2007. So now the members of the union are stuck with a 5-year contract that's bad in every conceivable way, that was sold to them based on lies and half-truths by Stewart, after she had given in to some of the smartest lawyers in Chicago, the negotiators for Mayor Daley's leadership.
So we want to put an end to the fact that the mayor select the CEO of the school. The school should be run like what it is, an educational institution. We need people with educational background and training running our schools, not an elitist business tycoon.
Charlie Walker, who's the LSC president for one of the 3 small schools inside Orr, got an enormous round of applause during the February 27th board meeting when he said we should fire this appointed board of millionaires and get to elect a school board for the Chicago Board of Education. Charlie Walker was not the only person to say that day. People from Pure and elsewhere also said it.
And elect the school board, okay, instead of being appointed by Mayor Daley. Because if you're appointed by the mayor the one signs your check. So you ain't going to really pay any attention or go out of your way to help those other people. You're going to do what the boss said. But as an elected school board member, you have to answer to the peoples that voted you in. And if you don't cooperate with them, you'll be voted out.
I have a few points that I just wanted to highlight about the problems with what the CPS is calling their reconstruction or reconstitution or whatever they're doing with the schools. The first thing is the exclusion of the voices of the elected bodies that govern these schools. Local school councils are elected officials who should be consulted just like any other elected official when there's going to be a decision made determining what they are responsible for governing. So that's the first problem. When local school councils are not consulted, are not informed to be able to act on their authority as local school council elected officials.
In order for an elected school board to come to reality in Chicago, people are going to have to undertake a comprehensive approach, which is going to include debunking virtually every claim that's come out of the media centers on behalf of this supposed miracle that Mayor Daley's done since he became dictator of the public schools in 1995. Now, there's almost nothing beyond spending a lot of money, billions of dollars on construction, that's been positive for the average public school person in Chicago since Daley took over. Even the creation of the elite schools, the new academic magnet high schools and a few other schools like it that Daley takes credit for, is really on the backs of the destruction of the general high schools and the communities around them. So comprehensively looked at, the Daley policies since 1995 under both Paul Vallis and now under Arne Duncan have been detrimental to the majority of people in Chicago across the board. But that argument is going to have to be made, and it's going to require people actually rethinking a lot of stuff that they've been led to believe in Chicago, while the political organizing goes on both in Chicago and in Springfield to change the law about how Chicago's public schools are governed.
We have military schools, charter school, music school, business school, special school, magnet schools, all types of names, small schools. What is the relevance of this? Well, it is designed to break the back of local school councils by having the names of all these different schools. Therefore, they don't have to have a local school council. And that's wrong. Parents do not have a say-so in these different names of schools.
The Chicago Teachers Union House of Delegates on March 5th, 2008, voted in favor, overwhelmingly in favor of a resolution calling on the city of Chicago to get an elected school board. So theoretically, that put the muscle of the 31,000 members of the largest union in the public schools behind an elected school board. And I assume that Marilyn Stewart's going to carry out that mandate now that it's been voted, and she's going to do political lobbying, legislative lobbying, and all the other things necessary to get an elected school board in Chicago. It's not going to be easy, but the momentum is building for that. But any political upheaval of that magnitude in a city this big requires an enormous amount of resources and organization at the ground level. It's probable that at this point there's 10 or 20 aldermen who might actually keep their mouths shut or favor an elected school board if it were presented by enough people with enough power within their wards. That can be built on. The same case has to be made in the Illinois General Assembly, because ultimately an elected school board for Chicago requires a simple change in the law governing the Chicago public schools. And that would be an amendment to the 1995 law called the Amendatory Act that gave Mayor Daley dictatorial power over the Chicago public schools.
The law on the books in Springfield need to make it crystal clear to CPS that you cannot go into any school in Chicago and bypass the LSC. The LSC are public officials. They are elected by the parents and the community. So for a group of people that's appointed to come in and tell a bunch of folks that are elected that they don't have no say-so is a violation of the law, and it should be a violation of the law.
Okay, so if we have an elected school board, this is going to mean more democracy. Can you explain why that's important?
You know, you almost have to laugh that we should have to explain why democracy is better than dictatorship. It's like asking why it was important for the Allies to win World War II, or for the North and the Union to win the Civil War. There are just benefits to having democracy and freedom as opposed to dictatorship and this dictatorial so-called market thing that's being pushed by Arne Duncan. I don't think you even have to argue that once you step outside the crazy bubble that Chicago's created around this whole school governance thing. What has to happen is that people have to be given the control and the reins of power over the Board of Education, as we already have them at the local school council level. The local school councils are elected. It's been a very successful movement for democracy. And for the past 6 years at least, Arne Duncan, on orders from Mayor Daley, has done everything possible to whittle away the power of the local school councils, especially in the poorest communities in Chicago. It's been an underhanded attack in some ways, a vicious frontal attack in other ways, and at almost every point it's been preceded by almost an artillery barrage of slander and lies and nonsense coming out of City Hall and all the media outlets that echo City Hall. But we've got a lot of good democracy already and a history of it in the local school councils and, of course, in the rest of the state where every school board is elected except Chicago. And there's no reason why we shouldn't try a couple decades or generations of democracy in our school board in Chicago.
In conclusion, we want folks to understand that the best form of pure democracy is your local school councils, because it gives you, the community, the parent, the opportunity to have a voice in the educational process and to control the resources in your school. Thank you very much.
I'd like to fill in some blanks from the last board meeting. Mayor McGuire stated, well, she was asking the board with her time, speaking time, about a 90-day moratorium.
We are asking for a moratorium of 90 days before any action is taken, so that will provide sufficient time to review the transcripts from the many community meetings and board meetings that have taken place.
Thank you, and I responded to that request.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That the union would like 90 days before they make a decision. And Rufus Williams answered, he already told her the answer. And she said, thank you very much, and sat down. The audience was a little confused, befuddled. The union should fight, but they didn't fight. By sitting down, she looked like she wasn't going to fight.
Well, the Chicago Teachers Union hasn't fought against school closing since Marilyn Stewart was elected in 2004. This is just the latest example of that betrayal of membership. One of the most important things about the February 27th Board of Education meeting was that Mary McGuire, the recording secretary of the union, was there on behalf of the Chicago Teachers Union. Neither Marilyn Stewart, who's the president of the union, nor Ted Daleys, who's the vice president of the union, was at the Board of Education and ready to speak on behalf of the 31,000 members of the union that day. That says a lot about what's been going on. What happened then in the exchange between McGuire and Rufus Williams, who's president of the board, was that apparently Williams had already told the union that he was going to move ahead with the agenda, because about 5 hours after McGuire said thank you, Williams led the voting on the closing of the or changing of the 18 schools. Of the 19 schools that were put on the hit list in January by Arnie Duncan, only one was removed from the hit list at the February 27th meeting, and that, as everyone now knows, was Abbott Elementary School. But the fact was that this was just the culmination of 4 years of betrayal by Marilyn Stewart.
The public has been lied to for the last 5 years, 6 years with the administration of George Bush. Lied to from Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, the whole war in Iraq. So where's the truth with, and now we've been lied to with the closing of 19 schools. They planned for 6 months and 9 months to close these schools. They planned this big lie to present to the public. And do you see an analogy with how the public has been lied to?
The Duncan administration has been very analogous to what was done in Iraq. The Bush administration, once the original part of the war in Iraq was over by May and June of 2003, set up the Provisional Coalition Authority in Baghdad under a guy named Paul Bremer, a Henry Kissinger privatization crazy, who then staffed the office of, to basically to privatize everything in Iraq and steal the wealth of the people of Iraq and put it in private hands. Not merely the oil companies and outfits like Kellogg, Brown and Root, but basically even down to the smallest possible security firms, some of these fly-by-night operations that were set up like Custer Battles. Arnie Duncan is very similar to Paul Bremer. He's a right-wing ideologue who believes that any public service and any public property is an affront to markets, that everything should be marketized and privatized, and that all public property and public service should be turned over to the private sector to enrich the few at the expense of the many. So to get back now to the previous 6 months. Duncan began school closing based on lies in 2002 with the closing of Williams, Dodge, and Terrell School. He continued it since then every year in the face of attempts by parents, teachers, and for a certain period of that time, the Chicago Teachers Union under Deborah Lynch to oppose those lies and those closings. When Marilyn Stewart was elected in 2004, she began the surrender, but the lies continued. The difference was that the union became dumber in the face of the lies, took less of an interest in learning exactly what was going on and collating the information at a citywide level. But the central thrust of the lies, and it goes on to this day, is the privatization of as many assets as possible, flipping closed schools into charter schools, coming up with all these gimmicks to increase privilege at the expense of the poor, the ousting of people from public housing, and then the closing of schools, which goes on often simultaneously. This is the Daley administration in action, and it's a domestic twin of the Bush administration in Baghdad. The crimes of Arnie Duncan at this point in history involve probably 30 or 40,000 children whose lives have been disrupted by all these school closings, the destruction of the career of more than 1,000 teachers and principals, the literal giveaway of hundreds of millions of dollars of Board of Education and public property to private and semi-private entities like the charter school operators and these education management organizations, which the goal of which is to become the educational equivalent of HMOs, what HMOs are in the medical industry. This is a much deeper thing than what's happened in the past 6 months. The fact that our side, the side of the people, the side of democracy, and the side of the working people, has not been organized intelligently to deal with it, still doesn't mean that the facts of history aren't out there for people to bring together and start understanding now. Just as it took us a while to catch up with the lies of Colin Powell, George Bush, Condoleezza Rice, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld, So it's taking us a while to catch up with the lies of Rufus Williams, Arnie Duncan, and Richard M. Daley about what's going on in their attacks on public schools in Chicago.